The Birth of Spearth. First there was number 1, the giant, and the creator, floating through the inky cosmos. For years there was nothing but him. Nothing. More nothing. And then, not nothing. Number 1 hit the only floating rock in the vast emptiness with a bang. Upon impact the creator lost his head and his brain flew from his skull onto the rock. He slowly rose up decapitated from the crater that he had made upon impact. Idly looked around with his headless neck and wondered what he would do next. Number 1 began walking around the planet and soon discovered how small it was. The planet was almost barren. It had no landmarks or points of interest and was perfectly round. He continued walking around the planet and after a day was back to where had landed. He tripped over the only plant on the entire planet and straight into the crater he had made the day before. As he put his hands down to cushion the fall, his hands fell into the splattered remnants of his head. He had already walked around the rock once and having found nothing of much use, decided to use the remnants of his head to sculpt himself some company. He made 3 creatures with 3 equal parts of his brain mush. The first creature bore a heavy resemblance to number 1 after he had fallen onto the planet. It had a stumpy neck for a head and had 4 limbs, 2 hands and 2 feet. The second creature that number 1 made was similar in shape to the first but had a head with a triangular wedge-shaped nose embedded in the middle of its face and 3 fleshy, finger-like blobs protruding from the top, which to a human eye resembled a glove. The third creature that number 1 made had a thin and wide beak like a duck and a smooth domed head. Number 1 had spent some time now making these creatures and once he had finished didn't care much for them. All 3 of the creatures lay there limp and were not responding to his prods and pokes. Although each of the 3 races had only been around for a small amount of time and had not had a chance to learn or evolve in any way, number 1 had already grown tired of them and decided to leave in search of something else to help pass the time on this lonely rock. Number 1 walked off leaving the 3 tiny creatures by the crater and the only small plant on Spearth. Due to their tiny size, time moved very quickly on Spearth for these 3 creatures. And by the time that the impatient and oblivious number 1 was out of sight, they had already woken from their birthing slump and were on their feet. The first thing that they saw when they rose was the lumpy plant that had tripped the creator into his crater, and this was what they instinctively decided to build their shelters around. As the giant walked around the planet searching for nothing in particular, he was completely oblivious to how his 3 creations were flourishing. The small lumpy plant began to grow, and around it, the 3 races started to develop their habitats from crude shelters to sophisticated houses, and soon these began to develop into their own complex worlds. They began to become more intelligent and evolve and reproduce at an unbelievable rate. And as more time passed, this rate became steeper and steeper. As their rates of evolution became more drastic, they became more and more intelligent, and time began to speed up for them, forcing time comparatively to be slowed down for the creator. This shift in the sense of time passing between the small inhabitants of Spearth and their creator soon became so vast that by the time the creator had completed his second loop around the planet, the 3 creatures had turned into 3,000, and had already built a highly developed and highly sophisticated civilization, which in their time had taken over 100 years to create. The creator was now back at the site of his landing in the growing city of Spearth. Although the civilization that had been built collectively by the 3 races seemed vast from their perspective, it was less than a trip hazard for the giant. The citizens of Spearth looked up in terror as the sky slowly became black. The enormous silhouette of their forgotten creator loomed over them as his foot fell upon their world. His foot came down, crashing past the lumpy plant's top and onto the inhabitants below. As his foot crashed into the ground, it crushed through homes and inhabitants as if they weren't there, leaving a huge footprint where there was once so much life. As the creator walked off, oblivious to the destruction he had just caused, the smoke and noise began to fade and it was more clear to see what damage had been caused. The world of Spearth was built up in thirds, with 1 equal third for each race. The damage caused to Spearth, however, was not so equally dealt. The creator's single footstep had destroyed half of the Glovehead's third of the city and had left the DuckDuck's third completely obliterated, with only a few small parts still standing. The headless race, however, by some mad stroke of luck had remained completely untouched in this tragedy. The untouched headless race saw the DuckDuck's city and people almost completely wiped out, and the Gloveheads with around half of their city in ruins. The headless had also by this point discovered that they had come out of this completely unscathed. They in their ignorance could only see this as a sign of their own goodness and purity. The great foot in the sky had passed them over, raining destruction on all unworthy surrounding them. As the panic in Spearth turned to confusion, and the Gloveheads and DuckDucks looked for some help and explanation for why this had happened, they were greeted by the Untouched with superiority and a lack of empathy. The struggling races were told that this was a declaration by the new god. The DuckDucks were denied help from their neighbors as they were seen as unworthy. The Untouched believed that this destruction had not happened without a reason. When the DuckDucks tried to move from their ruined city into the Untouched Third and the Gloveheads parts of Spearth, they were denied access. The relatively peaceful and integrated world of Spearth was beginning to show divisions. Walls were built and the DuckDucks were left on their own. Wilded out of the world that they had helped to build, the DuckDucks moved out to the arid desert lands of Spearth to seek a new home. The Untouched continued to exploit their newfound stature and place at the top of the hierarchy. They wilded out and banished the DuckDucks from Spearth and continued to exploit the eager to please Gloveheads, making them work, redeeming and appeasing themselves for things they did not do. One footstep, the entire class structure of Spearth was made. The once peaceful world became dark and conflicted.